I stood there trying not to fidget under the weight of a silence that felt heavier than the artificial gravity. Not the way she used to, like I was a particularly confusing stain on her carpet, but with this terrifying intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. She wasn't wearing her ceremonial armor, just the casual undertunic, and she looked less like a Grand Arbiter and more like someone who had just realized they forgot how to breathe. Her eyes were the giveaway. Those secondary eyelids, the nictitating membranes I'd spent weeks trying to decode, were doing something new. They weren't snapping shut in that opaque, obsidian black that meant she was annoyed or lying to a diplomat. They were fluttering. Fast, translucent ripples clearing away the darkness over and over again. It looked like a hummingbird trapped behind amber glass. She looked at my hand, then at my face, and her towering 7-foot frame seemed to shrink just an inch, curling inward. A soft chittering sound escaped her throat, a sound I was pretty sure wasn't in the official lexicon of the High Command. Oh no, I thought, the realization hitting me harder than the security drone that had tackled me 3 weeks ago. She's not pretending anymore. And the worst part was, neither was I. But honestly, if you had told me 20 days ago that I'd be standing here worrying about the romantic implications of a warlord's eye twitch, I would have asked what you were drinking and ordered a double. Because back then, there was no soft lighting or meaningful silence. There was just me, a very bad plan, and the Zenith Spire. The Spire is a mess of a station, a glorious spinning headache of trade routes and neon. It smells like ozone and recycled cinnamon air scrubbers. I was there for a quick job selling off a batch of navigational chips that were, shall we say, historically creative with their accuracy. It was a victimless crime, mostly because no one ever actually goes to the Nebulon sector anyway. I was halfway to the docking bay when the gravity tether caught me. It didn't hurt, but it was undignified. 1 second I was walking, the next I was dangling 3 feet in the air, spinning slowly like a display model. Then she walked in. Grand Arbiter Zola didn't enter a room so much as she occupied it. 7 feet of slate-gray skin and rigid posture, draped in fabrics that cost more than my entire ship. She looked at me dangling there, her primary eyes wide and unblinking, while those secondary lids clicked shut. Click. Black. Disinterest. "You are the disturbance," she asked. Her voice vibrated in the floorboards. I tried to salute, which is hard when you're floating. "I prefer the term independent contractor, Your Grace." She didn't smile. I didn't expect her to. Her species, the Vracs, were famous for 2 things: conquering star systems and having absolutely zero chill. She signaled the guards to lower me, and I dropped with a clumsy thud that knocked the wind out of me. I dusted off my jacket, trying to summon some shred of charm. "Look, if this is about the docking fees—" "It is about my public image," she interrupted, cutting through my nonsense with the precision of a laser cutter. She paced around me, inspecting me like I was a piece of produce she suspected might be bruised. "Small, soft, mammalian, you project an aura of harmless incompetence." I frowned. I'm very competent at being harmless." "Precisely," she said, stopping directly in front of me. "The Senate believes my people are incapable of peace. They call us cold, aggressive. They require proof of domesticity before they will sign the treaty." She leaned down, her face looming close enough that I could count the little bioluminescent freckles on her nose. "I require a consort," she said, "someone visibly fragile, someone who makes me appear gentle by comparison." I stared at her. "You want me to play house?" "I want you to keep breathing," she countered. "The airlock is the alternative." Put that way, the choice was fairly simple. The first week was a disaster of limbs and misunderstood cues. We had to walk through the Grand Promenade, a walkway filled with floating cameras and delegates from a dozen worlds. The script was simple: hold hands, look adoring, don't cause an intergalactic incident. Her hand was massive, cool and dry like polished stone. When I wrapped my fingers around her palm, she stiffened so hard I thought she might actually snap. "Relax," I whispered, smiling broadly for a hovering drone that looked like a shiny beach ball. "You look like you're escorting a prisoner to the gallows." I am essentially doing that, she muttered, staring straight ahead. I squeezed her hand. Try to look at me with something other than contempt. Pretend I'm a really interesting data pad, or a small, ugly dog you've grown fond of. She looked down at me then. Her secondary eyelids flickered, not black, but a hazy, confused gray. You are remarkably annoying, she said. That's the charm, honey, I beamed, patting her arm. That's why you love me. The crowd ate it up. The terrifying Warlord Zola, tolerating the small, noisy human. It was comedy gold. But as we walked, something shifted. The rigid tension in her arm began to fade just a fraction. She realized I wasn't going to let go. I wasn't scared of her, or at least I was acting like I wasn't. And for someone who had spent her whole life having people tremble in her shadow, having someone stand there and make fun of her posture must have felt like a revolution. The cameras were easy. It was the silence afterward that was the hard part. Back in the safety of the Arbiter's private suite, the noise of the station faded into a low, rhythmic thrum, leaving us alone with the truth of what we were doing. Zola stood by the massive viewport, her back to me, staring out at the streaking lights of the trade lanes. She looked like a statue carved from storm clouds, immovable, powerful, and utterly exhausted. I watched her reflection in the glass. Her secondary eyelids were squeezed shut, turning her eyes into pools of obsidian. It was the biological equivalent of a do not disturb sign, but I had never been very good at following instructions. You know, I said, leaning against the door frame and shuffling a deck of cards I'd swiped from the mess hall. For a warlord capable of crushing star systems, you have terrible posture when you're sad. She didn't turn around. I am not sad. I am calibrating. You're sulking, I corrected, walking over to the low table in the center of the room. It's a very human trait. I'm proud of you. She turned then, the movement sharp and irritated. Her eyelids were still pitch black, hiding whatever vulnerability lay beneath. You are insufferable. The Senate was impressed, but the trade delegation remains skeptical. They believe our union is unstable. I slapped the deck of cards onto the table. That's because you treat conversation like an interrogation. Sit down. I'm going to teach you a human survival skill. She hesitated, looking at the flimsy paper cards like they were explosive devices. Is this a combat simulation? In a way, I said, it's called poker. It's about lying to people's faces and taking their credits. You'll be great at it. She sat. It was a slow, deliberate process, her long limbs folding gracefully until she was eye level with me. I dealt the cards. They looked ridiculous in her hands, tiny rectangles engulfed by her slate-gray fingers. The first few rounds were painful. She didn't understand the concept of a bluff. If she had a bad hand, her eyelids went black. If she had a good hand, they fluttered clear. I won 3 rounds without even looking at my own cards. You have a tell, I said gently, sliding a stack of plastic chips toward my side of the table. A tell? Your eyes, I pointed. When you're stressed or lying, the inner lids close. When you're happy or confident, they clear up. It's like playing cards with a traffic light. She froze. Her hand went to her face, touching the ridge of her brow. That is involuntary. A weakness. I shook my head, reaching out to tap the back of her hand. It wasn't a calculated move. It was just instinct. It's not a weakness, Zola. It's honest. And honestly, it's kind of cute. The room went very quiet. Zola looked at my finger resting on her hand. She didn't pull away. She didn't stiffen like she did in the hallway. Instead, she took a slow breath, and I watched the miracle happen. The obsidian darkness in her eyes began to fracture. The membranes thinned, turning from black to gray to a shimmering, translucent pearl, and then they began to flutter. It was a rapid, soft movement, like the beating of wings. The bioluminescent freckles across her nose flared with a soft, warm amber light. You are strange, she murmured, the vibration of her voice traveling through the table and into my fingertips. You do not fear the things you should. I shrugged, keeping my voice light, though my heart was doing a complicated gymnastics routine in my chest. Maybe I just know what's worth being afraid of, and a bad poker face isn't on the list. She looked up, meeting my gaze. The barrier was gone. Her eyes were deep, alien, and startlingly bright. There was no Senate here, no cameras, no trade deal, just the quiet hum of the station and the heat of her hand under mine. "Deal again," she said softly. I grinned, picking up the deck. "You sure?" "I'm on a winning streak." She leaned forward, and her secondary eyelids gave one last, happy flutter. "I am a warlord," she said, and for the first time, her voice held a note of teasing warmth that matched the light on her face. "I do not surrender. I adapt." And as I dealt the next hand, watching the way the starlight caught the curve of her smile, I realized with a sinking, wonderful certainty that I was the one who had already lost. The game was rigged, the con was over, and I wasn't going anywhere. So, how did we get here? How did a terrifying warlord and a frantic con man go from airlock threats to soft eyes in the span of a poker game? It wasn't just magic, and it wasn't just destiny. It was psychology, messy, beautiful, biological psychology. Here's the wiring under the floorboards of their romance. You noticed how Zola's biorhythms stabilized when she held Jax's hand? That's not just sci-fi fluff. It's hard science. The facial feedback hypothesis suggests that our physical expressions don't just reflect our emotions. They can actually create them. When Jax and Zola forced themselves to hold hands and smile for the cameras, their brains, even Zola's alien one, started receiving signals of safety and connection. They tricked their nervous systems into releasing oxytocin. They were acting out love so well that their bodies forgot it was a performance. The body led, and the heart just quietly followed. Humor was the most important weapon in that room. For Jax, humor was a shield. He used it to lower Zola's status by calling a 7-foot warlord honey or teasing her posture. He made her less terrifying so he could survive. But for Zola, Jax's humor was a relief valve. She spends her entire life being perfect, rigid, and feared. When Jax laughed at her, he shattered that pressure. He didn't treat her like a god. He treated her like a person with bad posture. And that relief, that is addictive. The poker game was the turning point. Why? Because of something game designers call the when you sit down to play a game, the rules of the real-world hierarchy, debt, warlords, prisoners are suspended. Inside the game, everyone is equal. The only rules that matter are the cards on the table. In that magic circle, Zola wasn't a Grand Arbiter. She was just a player trying to bluff. That safety allowed her to drop her guard and her eyelids in a way she never could in the real world. They didn't fall in love in the throne room. They fell in love in the game.